thank you for coming to my talk and giving me opportunity to talk my program. I want to kind of share with you, and also hopefully if some of you or your student get interested in this program, that would be really great for me. The title of the talk is Bridging Categories of Mathematics and Conscious Phenomenology, which probably doesn't mean much, but I'll try to explain. So my main interest as a scientist is the neural basis of consciousness, how the conscious experience arises from the brain inside of our head. And this is academically, to me, one of the biggest mysteries present right now for science, like the origin of the universe, or origin of the human through evolution. Why does this conscious experience has to arise from the brain? Is really weird kind of thing. And not only the academic interest, but clinically assessing or monitoring the people who are in coma or locked-in syndrome is also something that is impressed need for resolving. And we are kind of approaching to this program through the last 20 years of the consciousness research. Also, some people cannot just communicate by the lesion in the language areas and so on, but they are still experiencing and also want to communicate with other people. But we don't still have that kind of technology. So engineering-wise, building this kind of clinical device would be one thing. But another thing is that beyond this artificial intelligence kind of projects right now, I foresee that there will be some people claiming that they created artificial consciousness, like this one is conscious on its own, but nobody right now can tell whether this guy is actually conscious or not. And this is, but will be this will happen in the future very soon. And in terms of practical application of this artificial consciousness, I think the limited resource, but some kind of a small device that needs to behave really intelligently, like a drone, who needs to cope with any kind of unforeseen situation, that needs to have some kind of circuits that are capable for consciousness in some sense. That's my hunch. So now I'm going to more of my own, original philosophical or academic interest. And my most passionate question is this: what it's like to be a bat? This is a question posed by famous philosopher Thomas Nagel 40 years ago or so, and bat is the animal that uses sound to locate things by emitting sound and then receiving the sound coming back, and then probably visualizing what's there outside, almost like visually, but through the sound sense. How do they feel is really unclear. Right now we know that anatomical organization of the bat's brain and how they behave ecologically and so on, but we really don't know how they experience. It's not like we cannot imagine how they experience, but to understand it is really, like becoming, what happens if you become a bat and get rid of all this language and memory and all this, capability, and how you feel if you become a bat? That's the question. And it seems like it's a really stupid question, but I think it's not a stupid question, because this is really clearly, formed question, and something like age of the universe or evidence of the evolution is also something that you cannot directly test or get the direct answer from the evidence. But if you have a relativity theory or Darwinian evolution theory, then we can test sort of marginal evidence and also make a prediction, precise prediction, and then see whether the evidence we have is consistent with the theory. And the same kind of approach can be done for the consciousness, and that has been done over the 20 years. So one of the more concrete questions that I think we can address right now is that why does visual experience feel very different from audition? This has to be answered from the brain anatomy and also activation pattern. but not directly in the not the kind of the ways that the other neuroscientists or psychologists has been approaching to it. And I think there is a place for the mathematicians, or collaboration with mathematicians and so on will be useful. And in fact, I'll mention this a little bit, but your approach of the quantum mechanics has some kind of relevance to it. So I was very interested in your talk. Anyway, so broadly speaking, the hypothesis I have, which I think is reasonable, is that you can think of the function which takes the brain connectivity, the connectivity among the neurons in the brain, and the states of the neurons, like whether it is activated or inactivated, and then taking that as an input and then predict or produce the output as a contents of consciousness. That's the kind of functions that we want to find. That's the sort of the goal of the consciousness research. And roughly speaking, I think this translates to patterns of the causal interactions among some subset of the neurons, not all of the neurons that we know, because there is a bunch of the neurons called cerebellum in the back of the head, which is 4 times more than the cerebral cortex, but still it doesn't really affect much on our conscious experience. So, simple theory of the complexity or, connectivity doesn't really do any good job for explaining consciousness. Why cerebellum with 4 times more neurons doesn't contribute anything to consciousness, but other, subset of the critical cortical neurons do is the question. And so this, subset of the neurons, the way they actually interact defines consciousness of contents of consciousness. By contents of consciousness, what I mean is what you perceive and what you think, what you feel, everything included. But only those things that you are consciously experiencing. So to test this hypothesis, we have some kind of theories to approach this actually right now, and it seems promising. But what we need right now is a mathematical tools for analyzing sort of the patterns of the interactions. And I think that is probably something to do with topological data analysis or category theory and things like that, but I'm not a mathematician, so I need some kind of collaborators for this. So this is a sort of category theoretical kind of picture of what we know from sort of qualia experiential side and also brain side. And what we need is sort of the theory that fills in between these things. So roughly speaking, there is a really curious phenomenon called rewiring. Usually, what you see through the eye results in visual qualia. And what you hear through the ear results in the auditory qualia. You hear things, right? Hearing and vision is so different. And whatever vision or whatever hearing is very, very different. And that kind of differential structure should be also retained in some kind of topological difference in some causal interacting patterns, whatever it is. But if you rewire the neurons in some way, and then so that information from the ear actually arrives into the visual cortex, or you are receiving the visual information from the eye, but is eventually processed in the auditory cortex, then curiously, that results in the visual experience, although it is processed in the auditory cortex. And in that kind of case, right now, our neuroscientific methodology doesn't have any way to explain why different areas of the brain produces exactly the same kind of experience. But there has to be some kind of category theoretical relationship among these. What it is, I don't know. So how much time do I have right now? 10 minutes. Okay, so in a sort of slightly different way, what I'm sort of proposing here is that when you experience something like this, whatever vision or audition, there must be something in the form of the causal interaction in the brain, or something that is derived from brain connectivity and activation patterns that isomorphically relates to each other. So something here is different than that is reflected in here. And for example, even if you see the same thing, some people might say that, no, I didn't see flower. I saw actually yellow flower. And then if he's actually not lying, that means that his brain somehow produces yellow qualia for seeing this one, and so on. And these kind of things has been empirically tested, but what is lacking is this, isomorphic relationship or functions. So so far I've been vague about one particular theory that is highly promising in this direction, and this one theory is called integrated information theory that I'm very passionate about, and we've been interested in this, but until recently it's been quite difficult to understand what it means for the information to be integrated, and it's unclear also with some other relationship with the other types of the measurements or causality or information measures. So in a recent paper we got just accepted 2 weeks ago in PNAS, we kind of clarify this, and in this audience I think this is the nice intuitive explanation of what it is, which is really likely to be related to the contents of consciousness, I think. So this relates to just a simple model kind of exercise. We can think of two neurons, 1 and 2. And then in the past time state, it is x1 and x2. And in the current state, it is transiting to y1 and y2. And then there can be many interactions, which is sort of your talk, but the self-sustaining interaction or simultaneous correlated noise interaction or causal interactions. Okay, and then the integrated information, which was proposed in the past, which is supposed to be related to consciousness, actually corresponds to the isolation of these interaction terms. And how do we test that? Is to construct a model that does not have this causal interaction part only. And then we create a best model to observe, to explain the observed, data, and then measure the distance between the two models in the probability space using a concept called information geometry. So this minimizes the distance between the actual model versus disconnected model corresponds to the integrated information. And this way of explanation actually unifies with other types of the related measures. So if you are familiar with the mutual information, I'm assuming that this mutual information retains the simultaneous correlation, but the mutual information across time is disrupted all. So self and also causal interaction is killed. And then compared to this disconnected model to full model, that is exactly the amount of the mutual information. And then the transfer entropy just kills one connection, and then integrated information kills all the across units connections only. And then something that has been previously proposed as an integrated information turned out to be not, because they also killed this simultaneous correlation. And we graphically, using the integrated information geometry, presented this kind of relationship in a very simple Gaussian case. In the case of the Gaussian autoregressive model, we can visualize that the integrated information is like sub-manifold within this probability space that contains both mutual information and also stochastic interaction in different way. And this one has just 2 degrees of freedom, cut. But this one cuts 1, 2, 3, 4 freedom, and this one simultaneous correlation also cuts several degrees of freedom more than integrated information. So it is a subset of the integrated information probability manifold. And this relates to all these, proposed, causal interaction kind of measures to integrated information. And what we are hypothesizing is that this guy, which isolates the causal interaction, is really likely to be related to consciousness. And then, based on this theory, we actually started applying the actual neuronal measures. Then we found something really interesting these days. So this is a neuronal recording from the real human brain, awake but epileptic. So they were implanted in electrodes inside the brain, and we recorded activity from area that responds to the face. And then if you just focus on just 4 electrodes, it shows some kind of complex pattern of the activity, and 0 seconds means presenting the face to the subjects. And if you consider number of the potential interactions, there will be 6 2 channels interaction, 4 times 3 channels interaction, and 1 for 4 interaction. That is sort of related to your thing, right? And yes.
This was people with epilepsy but not having a seizure.
No, they are pretty healthy and under the drug control. Yeah, but after this surgery, they are taken out. But it's very far. Yeah. And then, just by looking at the simultaneous interaction, as I explained, we can use entropy. And then entropy actually changes for different kind of combinations, like A, B, these 2 entropy changes over time, and also AD and so on. And the A, B, C, entropy for 3 units, entropy for 4 units, we can compute, no problem. And typically entropy just decreases after the stimulus is presented, which is just showing that the brain becomes less variable upon seeing stimulus. And then mutual information between the present and the past also behaves similar to entropy, like everything gets just reduces. It's not super interesting, but integrated information is actually very interesting. Some of the interaction becomes stronger. Some of them becomes actually weaker upon seeing something. And this is the kind of the pattern that I think is related to our conscious experience. So we visualize this into this kind of 3D model showing that high intensity of the interaction of all these things in height, and then putting it in some kind of arbitrary units or coordinates in x and y axis. And then what's interesting here is that we tested this patient in different tasks. And then we gave completely different instructions and so on. But whenever subject saw the face, there was a very specific pattern of the shape. And then even though we give the same stimulus and same instruction, if the subjects denied that seeing face, and seeing some noise pattern, then the shape looked completely different. And that's this thing. X and Y axis and the Z axis is the same. But as you can see, these 2 look similar. And these are from completely different tasks and different stimulus, but saying that the subjects saying that I saw face consciously. And these 2 are the identical task, identical stimuli, but subject denying seeing face and the confirming seeing face. And extending this, we did some kind of dendrogram analysis and then found that seeing face just clusters according to integrated information, but not for the mutual information or entropy. That's the kind of interesting results. So extracting the mathematical essence of the conscious phenomenology can probably tell us why something is conscious and something is non-conscious, and why visual experience and audition feels different. And my intuition is that the visual shape is so different from auditory shape in the way that we can probably quantify in a topological sense. But I don't know how to do it right now. There are some mathematical psychologists claiming that visual experience is like regroup theory, but I don't know the details. So what we need is that this, the technique to compare shapes of the causal patterns and so on. Do we have some more time or finish? Couple of minutes? Yeah. So just give you other kind of project that we are doing. I'm also interested in flies, and the fly is very small, but we can actually record the neurons with this very tiny things, and then interestingly, feed forward and feed back information processing seems to be behaving really similar to mammals' brain. And when we anesthetize this, small thing, then it also gets blocked in terms of the feedback, and that suggests that if I apply this integrated information analysis when it's awake, their integrated information is kind of significant, but under the anesthesia, it's small bits of the separated independent things. And yeah, I want to build some kind of anatomical index for this integrated information, but that's another topic. And yeah, anesthesia and the wakefulness for the rats. This is also some kind of interesting data using just a simple dissimilarity matrix. Awake and anesthesia neural activity looks kind of different, and each of these things actually are for different intensity of the auditory stimuli, and within these blocks it is a different frequency. And you can kind of see there is a pattern that looks different between anesthesia and awake, but when we use the sort of TSNE visualization technique, we found something really interesting. Under the wakeful situation, low intensity tone is represented around here, and then high intensity tone is represented around this. And this corresponds to going from low frequency to high frequency, which roughly corresponds to our phenomenology of the auditory structure, right? You don't know whether it is high frequency or low frequency if it's really low intensity, but if it's high intensity, it is gradually changing in terms of frequency. So that's what I'm foreseeing as a sort of topological structure of the auditory experience. And that is found only wakeful or auditory brain. But under the anesthesia, this kind of structure gets disrupted, and then there is some kind of discontinuous jump, maybe representing rats are not really experiencing something similar to wakefulness under anesthesia. But that's very difficult to ask rats at the moment. So that's pretty much it. Thank you.